This highlight of the moment has been brought to you by the National Advertising Challenge, where big brands get big ideas. Learn more at nationaladvertisingchallenge.com.
You can solve a lot of problems by reconceptualizing them or recontextualizing them. And I think we've created a kind of cult of measurability and a cult of accountability, which makes that very difficult to do. And I suppose if there's one thing that fascinates me in life is that it's very simple discrepancy, which is empirically, we can see that creative ideas are highly successful and significant. You know, that most problems are not solved directly, they're solved obliquely. We can see that actually highly oblique or lateral businesses, brands, are extraordinarily successful. So I always make this list of Dyson, Uber, Amazon Prime, Nespresso, Red Bull, etc. And it's a list of billion-dollar businesses where they made no sense at all to begin with. Okay, they were non-obvious businesses. And, you know, before, I mean, you look as if you're nearly old enough to remember the time before Starbucks. Are you just about?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So nobody before Starbucks was wandering around going, what really annoys me is I can't spend $4 on a coffee and then walk around carrying it, okay? There was no actual demand for Starbucks before it existed, or rather there was, but it was in a tiny number of niche places. You know, there was Pete's Coffee in San Francisco. There was probably a coffee scene in New Zealand and Australia, which would have been equivalent. Interestingly, because the coffee scene in Australia was very advanced because of a large amount of Greek and Italian immigration, Starbucks has never really taken off in Australia, interestingly. Nor in Italy. Italy and Australia were the two markets where Starbucks really had difficulty. But there was also a place which I went to in the early 90s called Cafe Strada in Berkeley, which I'd heard was the highest turnover per square foot retail outlet in the United States. I'm not sure if that was true or not. It seemed pretty unlikely. But it was this niche coffee shop just off the campus of Berkeley University, which was a kind of forerunner of Starbucks. It was a kind of Starbucks. And I went there, my brother went there because my brother was at Berkeley for a few years in the early 90s. And when my brother first went there, he was a Brit. And basically in Britain at the time, you said, can I have a cup of coffee, please? And they said black or white. And that was it. And do you want sugar? That was it. And my brother was queuing, and the person in front of him in the queue said, I'll have a half regular, half decaf latte with low fat milk. Okay. And my brother literally expected the barista, not that you call them that then, he expected the barista to go, yeah, and you can piss off. Okay, because to him it sounded like just a ludicrous request. And what baffled my brother was when the barista basically responded to this as though it was a perfectly normal requirement, you know. And so there was no demand for these things. There was no one could have done market research which said there clearly is this great space in the market for you know, an $800 vacuum cleaner in the case of Dyson, or in the case of Red Bull, you know, a really expensive weird tasting drink in a tiny can. You know, okay, you know, none of these things really make any sense in advance. And so it always interests me that the first requirement of anybody who's not an entrepreneur, who's in essentially making institutional decisions, is that what they're really interested in is not the quality of the outcome, it's the extent to which they can defend the decision-making process. And that leads to this thing called defensive decision-making, where people always do the thing that makes sense, which will earn them the credit in the event of success and which will be able to deflect blame in the event of failure. And that doesn't always correlate that well. That instinct doesn't always correlate that well with great imaginative ideas or outcomes. I mean, there's a fantastic quote, which I love, which is Harry Truman's quote, which is, anything is possible just so long as you don't care who gets the credit. And to some extent, you could probably gloss on that and say anything is possible just so long as you don't care who gets the blame.